Hello again. When a woman wants a child and then announces to her friends, "I'm pregnant," we offer our congratulations for the very good reason that we hope she'll have a great deal of happiness ahead. It's assumed there'll be a birth, a bouncing baby, and much rejoicing. For that reason, on those rare occasions when something goes terribly wrong, when a baby is born and then dies, there is great sorrow and sympathy for the grieving parents. And nowadays it's also understood, much better than it was, that when a mother loses her child in labour or has a stillbirth, this too is a cause for much grief. Until now, though, there's been very little attention given to those mothers who become pregnant but then lose their babies as a result of what is known in that anodyne phrase as a miscarriage. A death in the family remedies that omission.
I'd never been very maternal at all until I miscarried. And all of a sudden, here was one thing that I'd failed to do. All of a sudden, my body had let me down. And I just couldn't stand that. The failure idea of it, you know, was enormous.
I was angry at myself for ever getting pregnant. I was angry at the baby's father for getting me pregnant. I was angry at the baby because I felt I was used. You know, this child had just used me to grow, and then just as I'd got used to having it, it had just disappeared.
I think we tend to take the attitude that miscarriage is just a simple ailment in most cases. It's just like a woman having a really bad period, and it doesn't affect men. And perhaps if it affected men more, the attitudes would be different.
Of course, the media bombards you from all sides with, you know, wonderful motherhood, as though, you know, it is just as easy as falling off a log and everybody does it. So of course you feel you're the odd one out.
Maternity is made to look so easy that miscarriage always comes as a shock. Yet it's very common. Estimates vary, but about 1 woman in 6 who reaches the 5th week of pregnancy will miscarry before the 28th week. The risk is highest in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. It's a devastating experience, yet from the happy images all around, one would think that such a thing could never happen. The subject is virtually taboo. Everyone prefers the pretty picture of pregnancy. Shirley Cooper from the Midlands is a remedial teacher and a single mother. Before having her daughter, Joanne, she had a very late miscarriage at 6 months. She was always dissatisfied with the medical treatment she received, and she always felt her miscarriage was made light of. Just a little later, after 28 weeks, it would have been classed as a stillbirth and recognised officially as a death. Though she now has another child, Shirley still grieves for the loss of her first.
The morning I was in hospital, just after I lost the baby, I just felt I wanted to die. I think when you have a miscarriage or a stillbirth, you've got a death in the family. It is an actual death and it should be treated as such. And therefore you should be given some time to get over it. You should be given some time to grieve. And I think people expect you to cry for, say, a couple of weeks. They'll sympathise with you for a couple of weeks. But after that, you're supposed to be your normal self. You're not supposed to mention it. You're not supposed to be crying or anything. And I cried all the time. I mean, from the moment I realised that the baby had died, I cried. And I carried on crying for months. I'd be awake for hours on end, all day, all night. And then on the occasions that I did sleep, no matter what time I went to sleep, I woke up at 4 o'clock every morning. I'd wake up at exactly the same time that that child died. I'd lie there sort of wide awake, and I'd start thinking it was at this time that they came in and told me that she was dead. At the time I felt, and I still feel now, it doesn't matter when you have this child, whether it's 2 months, whether you carry it for 2 months, or whether you carry it for 9 months, 7 months. The fact is you've carried it, you've felt it, your life has actually changed, you've had to go out and make other arrangements, you've got to make preparation for this child, and it doesn't matter how far pregnant you are, you still feel it and it still hurts.
Jan O'Brien works as an accounts controller in the city and lives in Essex. She's had several miscarriages, all early in pregnancy. She started trying when she was 22. She's now 30 and still hasn't managed to have a baby.
I've had 5 miscarriages in all. The first miscarriage was a shock, but I was told 1 in 5 miscarriages, 1 in 5 pregnancies end in miscarriage. so you accept that. And then the second one was a shock because I had convinced myself everything was going to be all right. Then the third time they gave me the hormone treatment, and I thought, right, that's the answer. And miscarrying again, and with the attitudes and the going away and coming back to the antenatal clinic, that made that one worse still. And when we went to the London training hospital, they offered you the tests, and they did the tests, and then I convinced myself that number 4, this was it, I was going to end up with a baby at the end of it. So I think to a certain extent the 4th miscarriage was the worst, because I'd really convinced myself that they were going to have the answers, and then to lose again made it even worse still. And then when I got pregnant the 5th time, the doctor said, oh, your pregnancy test is positive. And I just turned around and said to him, tell me that in 10 weeks' time and I'll believe you. I tend not to sit there and think, by now, all being well, I'd have had a 6-year-old, and I'd have had a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I would be expecting a baby next month. You sort of try not to dwell on it, because it doesn't do you any good.
Julie Darling is a painter living in a cottage on the Yorkshire moors. She was an art teacher in Sheffield when she miscarried at just 8 weeks. She and her husband had taken time to plan the pregnancy, and it had then taken her a long time to conceive, which made the loss even harder to cope with. It also made her fearful of trying again. Because the miscarriage was so early, Julie felt embarrassed by the strength of her grief. Other people expected an instant recovery.
The morning that we got the confirmation that I was pregnant, we did the rounds of phoning up the family to tell them. And of course they were overjoyed. I think they'd all thought they were never going to be grandparents. And rushed into town and got books out of the library. And I still can't decide whether I wish we had or hadn't done it, but we went into one of the stores in Sheffield and just bought a little pair of booties, which became a kind of symbol, I suppose. And it was afterwards, it probably sounds really silly because they're just a very small thing and a lot of people wouldn't think it meant anything, but they became, you know, that child almost. They were for that child. And there were times afterwards when I actually found myself using them to focus on when I was feeling particularly upset. And I didn't know why I felt upset. I felt so confused. Why should I feel so badly when I'd only carried the thing for a very short time? And I found myself using those to remind myself it's all right, it was real. You're not just imagining it. And of course, since then, there's the problem that they're in a drawer, and occasionally you come across them. And although they're a very small, you know, innocuous thing, they still have the power to upset you.
I felt I was walking around with a chip up my shoulder all the time. You know, I resented nearly everybody, especially people with prams, new babies.
It didn't seem fair that other people seemed to be able to produce children like rabbits and have no problems. And all I wanted was one, and I couldn't have that one.
I actually felt at the time that I knew what it was like. But, you know, those people who go around stealing babies out of prams. I actually felt I was capable of doing it.
People are very fond of saying to you when you've had a miscarriage, oh, never mind, you're only young, you can try again. Or people say to you, oh, think how lucky you are, you haven't got to worry about children, you can go off on holiday. You can spend your money how you like, you haven't got children to consider. It's not a very Not when you're feeling sort of really down over the fact that you've had a miscarriage. It's no consolation being told if you want a new dress you can go out and buy one, because that's no substitute for a family.
I think a lot of people feel that unless you miscarry later on, it's something that you don't really feel. It doesn't really count, and it's not really real. And I think they don't appreciate that, especially if you've been waiting quite a while for it to happen. That child is absolutely real.
I telephoned an MP one day because she was a bit concerned about the hospital I was booked into. I telephoned her and said, well, I wasn't too happy about my treatment there. And she was ever so nice to me at first, and she kept calling me Mrs. Then I said, oh, I'm not Mrs., I'm Miss. And suddenly her attitude changed. She said, oh, well, perhaps it's a good job you did lose it, because not being married, you'd have found it ever so difficult looking after it. How would you have coped, she said. And I just said, you know, goodbye, and put the phone down.
People tend to think that because you've got pregnant, that there's nothing wrong with the man, and it's all your fault when you miscarry. They jump to conclusions. And there was a stage when I wanted them to turn around and say, there is a genetic problem and it lies with your husband, so that I could turn around and say to people, see, it's not all my fault. I know it would have been worse for him, but I would have been able to shift the blame.
I think one of the worst things was a complete feeling of isolation.
So I used to sort of sneak around, you know, back streets literally to get to the shops and straight back home again.
I'd meet somebody who hadn't seen me for a few months, and they'd say, oh, you've had your baby now, what did you have? And I'd say, oh, it died. And there'd be this sort of silence, and then they'd say, oh, I've got to dash now.
Other people's attitudes are bad enough, but the medical profession can be just as unhelpful.
My doctor actually said it was like crossing the road. You'd get knocked down, and he said, it happens to 1 in 4. And I said, well, I'm sure 1 in 4 people don't get knocked down crossing the road. And I felt at the time, I had this baby at 6, 7 months, therefore it wasn't 1 in 4 anyway. I think the statistics now is 1 in 400 or something.
When I asked if I could do anything to help minimise the risk next time, you know, he just said no. He was very surprised to be asked, and he just said, don't dote on it. You know, forget all about it as quickly as possible. You'll be as right as rain within 4 days. Of course, I thought, oh, well, you know, I'll go home, and by the end of next week, it'll all be in the past.
The local hospital just didn't seem to be bothered with you. You were just a nuisance if you asked questions, and as far as they were concerned, you had to go off and get pregnant again, and then they'd try and do something. And I began to feel like a parachutist and being told to jump, and sort of told, well, your parachute might open, and then again it mightn't. You've just got to take that risk.
I felt that the first one shouldn't have happened. You know, in spite of everything else that everyone else said about it being common and, you know, God's will and everything else, I still felt, and I still feel now, that perhaps that needn't have happened. Perhaps with a bit more care, I'd have 2 children now and not 1.
I can remember lying in bed and hearing 2 nurses walking up the corridor. And one of them actually said to the other one, you know, I never look at their faces.
Doctors aren't as supportive as they could be. I think they tend to sort of brush it under the carpet. So what if you've got a miscarriage? We have people coming in here with miscarriages all the time.
And these closed doors of the theatre in front of you, and you don't know what's behind. And afterwards you can only imagine, or try not to imagine, what happens. When I left the hospital, there was no interest at all from them in any backup, or from my doctor. I could have been dead for all I cared, and I did feel very isolated. I felt as though I'd just been pushed out from the shore, just cut adrift and left to just float wherever, because I didn't know where to go.
After a year of silence, Julie turned to the only source of support there is for women in her situation, the Miscarriage Association. Run by women who have been through miscarriage themselves, its head office is a cupboard in Heather Priest's home in Wakefield. It's been a lifeline for the hundreds of women who've been lucky enough to hear of it. the association is inundated with complaints about medical attitudes and care. One woman was told to flush her 4-month fetus down the toilet because, the doctor said, it's no use to me. So they have strong ideas about the need for change and for research.
I would like to see a follow-up screening of women who've miscarried during their next pregnancies. Very careful care. I'd like to see more preconceptual care clinics, and I'd like to see more information distributed as to preconceptual care. Too many women start too late. They're already pregnant by the time they want to do something about it. At the moment, until you've had 3 miscarriages, usually that's the magic number, very little in the way of tests are done to see why you've miscarried. I'd like to see that changed. I'd like to see routine examination of all miscarried fetuses, tissue, whatever is miscarried. I would like to see a routine testing of that, and hopefully then perhaps we'd have more answers. At the moment, so little is done that we don't have answers, and all doctors will usually say is that they don't know why women miscarry.
One of the very few hospitals in Britain looking into the causes of miscarriage is St Mary's in London. Jan O'Brien took part in a trial at St Mary's. An injection of antibodies to stop rejection of the fetus has provided an answer for a small percentage of women. It's a breakthrough for them. Jan has yet to see if it will work for her. But why isn't more research going on into other possible causes? The stock reassurance that it's a blessing in disguise, there was probably something wrong with it, accounts for only about half of miscarriages. What of all the others? No one expects a medical magic wand to wipe out miscarriage, but surveys show that most women wish that doctors would do more to find answers, and also tell them honestly when they don't know the answer, not fob them off with half-truths. At present, most women are left to guess as they grieve in secret.
If St Mary's haven't got the answer, well, I don't know where I'm going to go. There isn't an answer after this. And I just seriously consider the sterilisation option.
It would have been helpful if they had been able to carry out some tests, even if they'd been inconclusive. I would at least have felt that they'd done everything they could and there was an interest in me personally and that child, other than that I was just another statistic.
I hate azaleas, for as they bloomed, my child faded in my belly, till she was a dead steel ball inside a walking wild coffin, and no help, not even from her mother, who could not look, who listened to love clang in a kidney dish with eyes tight shut, and asked, "What is it?" "Providence," said the nuns. "Kind Providence. A little girl, and I do not even know where she is buried. Christine, I hate azaleas."
Much grief and distress from that group of women, and criticism too of the medical profession. And for a reaction from the medical profession, I've got with me here in the studio Mr. Robert Attlee, who is a consultant and also honorary secretary of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Those women were very critical, and in some cases they gave, there appeared to have been doctors behaving in really a very insensitive, and hospitals in quite a crass way. Do you share the view that there ought to be a lot more done to make doctors behave more sensitively?
Yes, I do. I think it was a sad film, Jonathan. That's the first time I've seen the film. It's a sad film and a complex one. It shows up the complex issues that there are in this matter of natural miscarriage. And I do think that we as a profession have got a long way to go yet in our management of the woman who has had a miscarriage.
Why do you think there is so much apparent insensitivity?
I think that it's a question of training. I think it's a question of embarrassment. I think it's a question that often the young doctors at the sharp end of hospital practice are left to handle the immediate situation, when really I believe that a lot of this work should be for the senior man or woman in the team, because they have the life experience and perhaps can handle, not perhaps, I think certainly, can handle the situation with more credibility, more warmth, more sympathy, more reassurance hopefully, and perhaps give more hope for the future.
You are in the Royal College, as it were, at the apex of the profession. What can you do to persuade consultants, your senior colleagues, to do something about it?
Well, we have moved recently. The past president of our college, Sir Rustam Feroz, in fact set up a working party very recently to look into the management of parents who'd had a perinatal death. That's a death around the birth, a stillbirth or a neonatal death. And the principles in those guidance notes, which we hope will be distributed all over the country and perhaps worldwide for all I know. I do know that the Department of Health are pleased with the guidance notes. I think that the principles within the guidance notes could very well apply to the management of the early miscarriage.
Should there be something special done in the case of miscarriages, which are far more numerous than stillbirths? Should there be special guidance in the case of miscarriages?
I think there should, and I think the special guidance really means that we should pay more attention. I mean, I was really saddened to see the trite phrase that the women repeat that have been given to them. Very sad when you've just lost a baby and somebody says to you, well, you're only young and you can try again soon. It really is very unhelpful.
When you could say what?
Well, I think you could say, look, I mean, the first thing I think we must say is that we're very sorry. I'm sorry that you've lost your baby. And when you've got over your immediate grief, let's have a talk and let's see what we can constructively do. And that really means that we've got to spend more time and effort with our women.
Very briefly, is there any prospect of research reducing the incidence? There was a lot of call there for more research. Is that a serious prospect?
I think it is a serious prospect. Professor Beard's work at St Mary's that was referred to there, which involves the injection of husband's white cells into the woman who has miscarried once or more times in order that she may develop antibodies which will stop her rejecting her baby.
But that's got to be extended much more widely, that
Certainly,
kind of research.
But Professor Beard's department is doing this excellent, very well designed trial, and there is work being done in my own university. Dr. Peter Johnson in the Department of Immunology is taking Beard's work on by injecting a solution of placental tissue, afterbirth tissue, into women in the hope that they will develop antibodies which will stop them rejecting their fetus. But Jonathan, this is only in problems of immunology. I would hate the people to think that this is going to be the panacea, because it won't be.
Robert Attlee, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you want to know more about miscarriage, because it's obviously a big and complicated area, we've in fact prepared a fact sheet on the subject, and you can get that by writing to this address. It's Miscarriage Documentaries, Yorkshire Television, Leeds LS3 1JS. And that's all for this month. I'll be back with the next First Tuesday on the first Tuesday in September. See you then. Good night.